What if I told you that the pristine white marble statues we see in museums today were once painted in vivid colors, and that the ancient Greeks looked nothing like the pale, idealized figures we imagine? The truth about ancient Greek appearance is far more complex and fascinating than most people realize. When we think of ancient Greeks, we often picture the classical sculptures of gods and heroes carved from white marble, but this gives us a completely false impression of how these people actually looked. The reality is that ancient Greece was a melting pot of different peoples, ethnicities, and physical appearances that evolved over more than 1,000 years of history. To understand what ancient Greeks really looked like, we need to start with the earliest inhabitants of the Greek peninsula. The first people to settle in what we now call Greece were likely related to the populations of Anatolia and the Near East. These early inhabitants had darker complexions, dark hair, and brown eyes, much like many modern Mediterranean peoples. Archaeological evidence from skeletal remains and DNA analysis confirms that the earliest Greeks shared genetic markers with populations from the Eastern Mediterranean and Western Asia. Around 2100 BCE, a new wave of people began migrating into Greece from the north. These were likely Indo-European speakers who brought with them new languages, customs, and possibly different physical characteristics. Some of these northern migrants may have had lighter skin, hair, and eyes than the existing population. However, rather than replacing the earlier inhabitants, these groups intermingled and intermarried, creating the diverse population that would become the classical Greeks. The Mycenaeans, who flourished from about 1600 to 1100 BCE, were the result of this mixing of populations. Linear B tablets and archaeological evidence suggest they were a diverse people with varying physical characteristics. Some Mycenaean frescoes and pottery show people with dark hair and olive skin, while others depict individuals with lighter features. This diversity would continue to characterize Greek populations throughout their history. After the Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE, Greece entered what historians call the Dark Ages. During this period, there were further population movements and migrations. The Dorians, another Indo-European group, settled in various parts of Greece, particularly the Peloponnese. Like previous migrations, this didn't result in wholesale population replacement, but rather added another layer to Greece's genetic and cultural diversity. By the Archaic period, beginning around 800 BCE, the Greek world had expanded far beyond the mainland. Greeks had established colonies throughout the Mediterranean and Black Sea regions, from Spain to the Crimea. This expansion brought them into contact with countless other peoples, including Phoenicians, Egyptians, Scythians, Thracians, and many others. Intermarriage and cultural exchange were common, further diversifying the appearance of Greek populations. The classical Greeks themselves were well aware of their physical diversity. Ancient Greek literature and art frequently describe people with varying hair colors, eye colors, and skin tones. Homer's epics, for instance, describe heroes with both dark and light features. Achilles is described as having golden hair, while Odysseus is depicted with dark hair and a weathered appearance. These weren't considered unusual or exotic features, but simply reflected the natural variation within Greek populations. Greek pottery and sculpture from the classical period also reveal this diversity. While many pieces show idealized figures, others depict more realistic portrayals of Greeks with various physical characteristics. Red figure pottery often shows people with different skin tones, hair textures, and facial features. Some figures are painted with lighter skin, others with darker, olive-toned complexions that were common in the Mediterranean region. The famous sculptures we associate with ancient Greece were actually painted in realistic colors when they were created. The Venus de Milo, the Parthenon sculptures, and countless other masterpieces were originally adorned with paint that depicted realistic skin tones, hair colors, and eye colors. The paint has simply worn away over the millennia, leaving us with the white marble we see today. When archaeologists use special techniques to detect traces of ancient pigments, they often find evidence of brown, olive, and tan skin tones, as well as brown, black, and occasionally blonde or reddish hair. Regional variations were also significant in ancient Greece. Greeks from different areas often had distinct physical characteristics based on their local ancestry and geography. Athenians, Spartans, Macedonians, and Greeks from the islands or colonies might look quite different from one another. Northern Greeks, such as the Macedonians, were often described by Southern Greeks as being taller and sometimes having lighter complexions, possibly due to their mixed ancestry with Thracian and Illyrian peoples. The Greeks from the eastern islands and colonies in Asia Minor frequently intermarried with local populations, creating communities with distinctly mixed characteristics. Similarly, Greeks in southern Italy and Sicily developed their own unique physical traits through intermingling with local Italic peoples. Those in the Black Sea colonies often showed influences from Scythian and other nomadic groups. Ancient Greek writers themselves commented on these regional differences. Aristotle noted variations in physical appearance between different Greek populations and even theorized about how climate and geography might influence physical characteristics. Herodotus described encountering Greeks in various colonies who had adapted different appearances based on their local environments and neighbors. The question of skin color is particularly important to address because modern misconceptions often assume ancient Greeks were uniformly pale-skinned like Northern Europeans. However, Greece's Mediterranean location meant that most Greeks would have had the olive to medium brown skin tones, typical of people who live in sunny coastal climates. This is confirmed by ancient art, literature, and modern genetic studies of Mediterranean populations. Ancient Greek art actually used different conventions for depicting skin color based on gender and social class rather than ethnicity. In many painted ceramics and frescoes, women were often painted with lighter skin tones than men. Not because Greek women were naturally paler, but because social conventions expected upper-class women to spend less time in the sun. Men who worked outdoors or served in the military were typically depicted with darker, more tanned skin. The Greeks also distinguished between different types of complexions using specific terminology. They had words for various skin tones and hair colors that indicate they recognized and accepted a wide range of physical appearances as typically Greek. This linguistic evidence suggests that physical diversity was considered normal and unremarkable in Greek society. Hair color and texture also varied considerably among ancient Greeks. While dark hair was probably most common, as it is in Mediterranean populations today, blonde and red hair certainly existed and was sometimes prized for its relative rarity. Some Greeks used various methods to lighten their hair, including sitting in the sun, wearing special hats with holes to allow streaking. Hair dyes made from various plants and minerals were also used to achieve different colors. Eye color showed similar variation. While brown eyes were likely most prevalent, blue, green, and hazel eyes also occurred naturally in Greek populations. Ancient literature contains numerous references to characters with different eye colors, suggesting this variety was common enough to be worth noting, but not so rare as to be shocking. Physical build and stature also differed among ancient Greeks. Northern Greeks were often described as being taller and more robust than their southern counterparts, possibly due to genetic influences from northern populations and different dietary patterns. Island Greeks might have developed distinctive characteristics based on their maritime lifestyle and relatively isolated gene pools. The idealized physical standards promoted in Greek art and literature shouldn't be mistaken for how most Greeks actually looked. The classical ideal of beauty, with its emphasis on perfect proportions and symmetrical features, was exactly that, an ideal. Real Greeks came in all shapes, sizes, and appearances, just as people do today. Military service also influenced how we might imagine ancient Greeks looked. Greek soldiers, especially the famous hoplites, spent considerable time training outdoors and campaigning in the sun. This would have given many of them deeply tanned, weathered appearances, quite different from the smooth marble statues we see in museums. Scars from combat were common and were often worn as badges of honor rather than hidden. The role of slavery in ancient Greek society also contributed to physical diversity. Greeks enslaved people from all around the Mediterranean and beyond, and some of these slaves eventually gained freedom and integrated into Greek communities. This constant influx of people from different regions and ethnic backgrounds added to the genetic and physical diversity of Greek populations. Trade relationships similarly brought Greeks into contact with people from Africa, Asia, and other parts of Europe. Merchants, diplomats, and travelers frequently intermarried with locals during their journeys, bringing new genetic influences back to their home communities. The cosmopolitan nature of cities like Athens meant that they were particularly diverse in terms of their population's physical appearances. Religious festivals and athletic competitions, like the Olympic Games, brought together Greeks from all over the Mediterranean world. These gatherings would have showcased the full range of physical diversity within Greek populations. The fact that all these different-looking people were considered equally Greek tells us something important about how the Greeks themselves understood identity and belonging. Modern genetic studies of Mediterranean populations provide additional insights into ancient Greek appearance. DNA analysis of modern Greeks shows influences from multiple ancient populations, including early European farmers, Indo-European migrants, and various other groups. This genetic diversity would have been even more pronounced in ancient times when populations were more isolated and regional differences more distinct. The ancient Greeks' own artistic and literary traditions celebrated physical diversity rather than promoting a single ideal of appearance. While certain features might be praised in specific contexts, there wasn't a uniform standard of what a Greek should look like. This acceptance of diversity was quite different from some later European attitudes about physical appearance and ethnicity. Climate and lifestyle factors would have significantly influenced how ancient Greeks looked. People who worked outdoors in agriculture, fishing, or construction would have developed the deeply tanned, weathered appearance typical of Mediterranean outdoor workers. Those in more sedentary occupations or higher social classes might have maintained lighter complexions, but this was a matter of sun exposure rather than natural skin color. Nutrition also played a role in physical development. Greeks with access to diverse diets, including fish, olive oil, grains, and various fruits and vegetables, would have developed differently than those with more limited food sources. Regional dietary differences based on local resources would have contributed to variations in build and stature between different Greek communities. The ancient Greeks were clearly a diverse people whose appearance reflected their complex history of migrations, conquests, colonization, and cultural exchange. Rather than the uniform, pale figures often depicted in modern popular culture, real ancient Greeks displayed the full range of Mediterranean physical characteristics. They had olive to brown skin tones, predominantly dark hair and eyes with some variation, and builds that reflected their active outdoor lifestyles. Understanding the true appearance of ancient Greeks helps us better appreciate the diversity and complexity of their civilization. It reminds us that the ancient world was not populated by people who looked like modern Europeans, but by Mediterranean peoples whose physical characteristics were shaped by thousands of years of history in one of the world's great crossroads of human migration and cultural exchange. The next time you see those white marble statues, remember that they were once painted in living color to represent people who looked much more like modern Mediterranean populations than the pale figures we imagine today.